Along much of North America's west coast, something strange began to happen beneath the waves. Divers and scientists increasingly found lifeless stretches of ocean floor where once thriving underwater forests had existed. These seabeds, now eerily silent and empty, were dominated by just a few lonely fish and an overwhelming number of sea urchins. It was a scene of quiet devastation. The most striking detail? These barren stretches had once been rich kelp forests, vibrant ecosystems teeming with marine life. Underwater forests, especially those formed by thick seaweed like kelp, are far more than just beautiful underwater landscapes. They are living, breathing habitats that support a staggering range of ocean life. Fish, crustaceans, mollusks, and other invertebrates thrive in these environments. Kelp not only provides food but also shelter, protection from predators, and a stable ecosystem in which marine life can flourish. Without kelp, everything else collapses. So, what caused these thriving underwater jungles to vanish? And more importantly, how do we bring them back? The answer, surprisingly, lies in one of the most adorable animals on Earth, the sea otter. Sea otters have a long and fascinating history on our planet. They are members of the weasel family, and scientists believe they evolved from freshwater-dwelling relatives that roamed the Earth around 5 million years ago. While many members of the weasel family stayed near rivers and lakes, some ventured into the ocean and adapted to saltwater life. Over time, these pioneers evolved into the sea otter, a species now found along the coasts from northern Japan to southern California. But long before modern threats like pollution and habitat loss, sea otters were already facing serious challenges. Natural population fluctuations, disease, and other environmental pressures kept their numbers in check. By the time Europeans made significant contact with the Pacific coasts in the 18th century, the sea otter population had already been reduced, some estimates say, to around 150,000 to 300,000 individuals. Unlike whales or seals that rely on thick layers of blubber to survive cold waters, sea otters evolved a different strategy: insulation through fur. And not just any fur. Sea otters have the densest fur in the animal kingdom, with more than 150,000 hairs per square inch. This fur traps a layer of air close to their skin, keeping them warm in the frigid waters of the Pacific. But such luxurious fur came at a cost. When European traders discovered the value of sea otter pelts, it triggered one of the most devastating wildlife hunts in history. Starting around 1741, fur traders from Russia, Britain, Spain, and later the United States all competed for control of the lucrative trade. By the end of the 19th century, sea otters had been hunted to the brink of extinction. From an estimated 250,000 individuals, their population fell to fewer than 2,000. The Great Hunt, as it's come to be known, devastated otter populations across their range, from the Aleutian Islands to California. Markets in places like London and Moscow thrived on the sale of otter pelts, but by the 1880s, the supply began to dwindle. Hunters had to search further and further, often returning empty-handed. Yet, amidst the ecological tragedy, a few surviving otter populations managed to cling on in remote coastal regions, particularly in the Aleutian Islands and Alaska. Recognizing the damage, conservationists began to act. In the 1930s, a nature reserve was established on Amchitka Island, one of the Aleutian Islands. Protected from hunting, the sea otter population there slowly began to recover, but their comeback faced a new and unexpected threat: nuclear testing. During the Cold War, the U.S. government used Amchitka for underground nuclear weapons tests. Unsurprisingly, this disrupted the local environment and impacted sea otter numbers once again. Still, by the 1980s, there were promising signs. Estimates suggested that between 55,000 and 100,000 otters had returned to the Aleutian Islands. Legal protections, including the 1911 International Fur Seal Treaty and the U.S. Endangered Species Act, gave the species breathing room. Populations began stabilizing, especially in remote Alaskan waters. But that wasn't the case everywhere. In some regions, sea otters had been completely wiped out. By 1929, they had vanished entirely from the coast of British Columbia. And where otters disappeared, underwater life changed dramatically. Without sea otters, sea urchins multiplied without restraint. These spiny creatures are voracious herbivores that feast on algae and kelp. Left unchecked, they can strip the seafloor of plant life entirely. The result? Marine deserts. Bare rocks, no fish, no shelter, just endless fields of urchins. These barren areas were a direct consequence of removing a single key species from the ecosystem. Recognizing this, Canadian scientists launched a bold reintroduction program. In 1969, they transported 29 sea otters from Amchitka Island to Checleset Bay on Vancouver Island. Unfortunately, many of the animals didn't survive the stressful journey. A second attempt in 1970 saw only 19 survivors from 45 relocated otters. But researchers didn't give up. In 1975, they tried a new method, administering anti-stress hormones to the animals before transport. This time, all 46 otters survived. That marked a turning point. Even a few dozen sea otters could make a major ecological impact. Why? Because sea urchins are a favorite food of otters. One otter can consume thousands of urchins in a short period, which gives kelp forests a chance to regrow. And these forests matter. Kelp ecosystems are among the most productive in the world. Despite covering only 0.1% of Earth's surface, they contribute nearly 1% of global primary production. They provide nursery grounds for fish, food for herbivores, and even help regulate atmospheric carbon. Thanks to the return of otters, the ecosystem around Vancouver Island began to rebound. In areas where urchins once dominated, kelp forests returned, fish and invertebrates followed, and the sea otter population boomed. From a few dozen in the 1970s to over 3,000 by 2004 and more than 5,600 by 2013. By 2007, the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada reclassified sea otters from threatened to a designation of special concern. It was a significant victory for marine conservation, but not all threats had vanished. One of the most dangerous adversaries to sea otters today isn't a hunter with a rifle, but oil. Sea otters' dense fur, the very thing that keeps them alive in cold waters, is incredibly vulnerable to oil contamination. When oil coats their fur, it eliminates the air layer that provides insulation. Without that barrier, sea otters rapidly lose body heat, become hypothermic, and often die. Worse, their natural instinct is to groom their fur, so when they try to clean themselves, they ingest the toxic oil, leading to internal poisoning. This isn't just theory. In March 1989, the Exxon Valdez oil tanker struck a reef in Prince William Sound, Alaska, spilling over 37,000 tons of crude oil into the ocean. It became the second worst oil spill in U.S. history. Among the hardest hit species, sea otters. More than 1,000 dead sea otters were recovered, but the true death toll is believed to be several times higher. And the damage wasn't short-term. 17 years later, in 2006, a federal oversight report concluded that sea otters were still suffering the consequences of that spill. Residual oil remained in sediments and along the coast, continuing to threaten animals that dug for clams or swam in shallow waters. Could otters simply escape an oil spill by swimming away? Not really. Sea otters are coastal animals that avoid deep water. They dive to the ocean floor to find food, meaning they're limited to specific nearshore habitats. An oil spill in one of these areas can wipe out an entire population with nowhere to go. And oil isn't the only threat. In the early 2000s, scientists noticed a dramatic and unexplained drop in sea otter numbers in the Aleutian Islands. The population fell from around 100,000 to just 6,000. Disease and starvation were ruled out. The most likely culprit? Orcas. Normally, killer whales feed on seals, sea lions, and large marine mammals. But due to decades of commercial overhunting, those traditional food sources had declined. Faced with fewer options, orcas may have turned to sea otters. Small, slow, and easy to catch. Although the theory is still debated, some researchers believe it may explain the sharp decline. So where does that leave us? Despite these challenges, the sea otter story remains one of the most inspiring conservation comebacks in history. It's a powerful reminder that ecosystems are intricately interconnected, and that removing one key species can unravel the entire web of life. But it's also a cautionary tale. Protecting sea otters isn't just about saving a cute animal. It's about maintaining the balance of coastal ecosystems, preserving biodiversity, and learning from our past mistakes. Whether facing oil spills, changing predator dynamics, or climate shifts, the continued survival of the sea otter will depend on the choices we make. And if we get it right, the reward is immense. The return of thriving underwater forests, rich biodiversity, and coastlines full of life. Not just for otters, but for all of us. If you walk along the shores of the Chesapeake Bay today, you might stumble upon a curious scene. People tossing oyster shells into the water or scattering them across the beach. At first glance, it might seem like an odd ritual, maybe even a quirky local tradition. But behind this simple act lies a powerful environmental mission. The restoration of one of America's most iconic and ecologically rich bodies of water. What may look like casual shell tossing is actually part of a massive, coordinated effort to revive the Chesapeake Bay's struggling ecosystem. And at the heart of this effort is the humble oyster. Once upon a time, the Chesapeake Bay was a thriving aquatic paradise. Its waters teemed with life. Quirky blue crabs scuttled along the bottom. Schools of fish, including Atlantic sturgeon and even small sharks, glided through the currents, and dolphins occasionally breached the surface. Underwater meadows of seagrass stretched for miles, supporting this vast network of creatures. Oysters were especially abundant. These bivalves didn't just sit idle on the seafloor. They played a crucial role as natural water filters, cleaning and cycling nutrients throughout the bay. But as human settlement intensified around the bay, this vibrant ecosystem began to collapse under the pressure. Look at a map of U.S. population density, and you'll quickly spot the issue. The Chesapeake Bay watershed is surrounded by some of the most heavily populated areas on the East Coast. Cities like Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Richmond, and Arlington fall within its drainage basin, contributing to the stress on the bay. This dense human footprint has brought with it serious consequences. Industrial discharges, urban stormwater runoff, and widespread agricultural activity have filled the bay's tributaries with pollutants. Two of the most problematic are nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients that, in excess, become toxic to aquatic ecosystems. In 2022, the Chesapeake Bay program reported that agriculture alone was responsible for nearly half, 48%, of the nitrogen and over a quarter, 27%, of the phosphorus pollution entering the bay. Wastewater treatment plants, though regulated, often struggle to cope with heavy rainfall. When overwhelmed, these systems release untreated waste directly into local waterways. In 2021, two facilities alone, Back River and Patapsco, were responsible for a significant portion of nutrient pollution, 11% of nitrogen and 15% of phosphorus. The excessive nutrients spark explosive algae growth, creating dense blooms that choke the bay's waters. These algae block sunlight from reaching underwater vegetation, and, as they die off, they sink and decompose, sucking oxygen from the water. This process leads to the formation of hypoxic zones, commonly known as dead zones, areas so oxygen depleted that most marine life can't survive. The Chesapeake Bay was one of the first places in the world where a dead zone was formally documented, back in the 1970s. By 2010, these areas were killing off an estimated 75,000 tons of bottom-dwelling organisms annually. Creatures like worms and mollusks that serve as essential food sources for larger species, including the iconic blue crab. What was once a rich underwater landscape has been reduced to lifeless, muddy stretches of seabed. But nature, if given the right help, has a remarkable ability to bounce back. And that's where oysters return to the story, not just as victims of ecological collapse, but as potential heroes of recovery. Oysters are more than just a seafood delicacy. A single adult oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day, removing algae, sediments, and excess nutrients from the water. They form reefs that create vital habitats for fish, crabs, and other marine species. Historically, the bay's oysters were so plentiful they could filter the entire bay's volume in just 3 days. But centuries of overharvesting and disease have decimated their numbers. By 1988, what once took 3 days now took 325. Maryland's oyster reefs, which once spanned 313 square miles, had dwindled to just 58 by 2008. Their decline left a gaping hole in the bay's ecosystem and accelerated the growth of dead zones. Recognizing the oyster's ecological value, restoration efforts have accelerated in recent years. But simply tossing shells into the water doesn't magically bring back the reefs. Oyster shells serve as perfect homes for new oysters, but they must be prepared properly. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation, CBF, plays a central role in this process. Each year, the organization collects around 4,000 bushels of oyster shells, about 90 tons, donated by local restaurants and residents. These shells undergo cleaning and drying before being placed into tanks filled with millions of microscopic oyster larvae. The larvae latch onto the shells, beginning their transformation into adult oysters. Once mature enough, the young oysters are relocated into the bay to rebuild reef structures. Beyond traditional shell seeding, new innovations are also reshaping restoration techniques. One such tool is the reef ball, a concrete dome with holes and a textured surface that mimics natural oyster reefs. Reef balls can either be deployed bare or pre-seeded with larvae. Even when left unseeded, they provide valuable refuge for marine life. These efforts are already producing measurable improvements. In 2010, the Chesapeake Bay's ecosystem health score inched up to 31 out of 100 from 28 just 2 years prior. The trend has continued. By 2023, the bay received a C+ rating, the highest in more than 2 decades. One landmark initiative in this recovery is the Chesapeake Bay program, launched in the 1980s. Its comprehensive plan includes more than 100 specific goals to reduce pollution, protect habitats, and support native species, with oyster reef restoration as a centerpiece. A shining example of this work is Harris Creek in Maryland. There, more than 348 acres of reefs have been successfully restored, with 98% of those meeting the threshold for healthy oyster populations. Across the bay, as of 2023, over 570 acres of oyster reefs have been brought back to life. Restoring oyster reefs isn't just about throwing shells into the water. It's a carefully choreographed operation involving extensive planning, logistics, and scientific monitoring. Each project begins with a detailed blueprint, outlining where reefs will be built, the materials required, the timeline, and how success will be tracked. Shells must be collected, processed, and inoculated with larvae before deployment. Often, this involves transporting tons of material over long distances, a process that demands time and coordination. In some cases, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers assists with reef construction, lending its heavy equipment and manpower. To streamline operations, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation introduced a novel solution, a mobile oyster restoration center. This floating facility, built on 2 interconnected barges, includes 6 tanks that each hold over 845 gallons of water. Here, larvae are introduced to shells or reef balls directly on the river, where they'll eventually be planted. This approach eliminates long-distance transport and doubles the oyster production capacity in Virginia to 15 million per year. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation isn't the only organization involved in this monumental task. The nonprofit Oyster Recovery Partnership, ORP, has emerged as a major player, often working independently, but also collaborating with state and federal programs. Since its founding in 1994, ORP has planted over 10 billion oysters across nearly 3,000 acres of bay waters. Its shell recycling program is the largest in the country, collecting from 200 restaurants and over 70 public drop-off sites across the Mid-Atlantic. To date, they've gathered more than 300,000 bushels, enough to seed around 1.3 billion oysters. What makes these efforts even more impressive is the widespread public involvement. Over 2,000 volunteers have joined ORP's restoration projects, scrubbing shells, building reef balls, and helping to seed oyster larvae. Many volunteers even become citizen scientists, monitoring the health of reefs and gathering data to support long-term conservation. These collective actions, from local seafood restaurants donating used shells to volunteers spending weekends nurturing oyster spat, are building momentum for one of the largest environmental restoration projects in U.S. history. The work is far from over. Climate change, ongoing pollution, and habitat destruction continue to threaten the bay's recovery. But the steady comeback of the oyster population is a beacon of hope. With continued support, innovation, and collaboration, the vision of a clean, vibrant Chesapeake Bay isn't just a dream. It's a goal within reach. So, the next time you see someone tossing an oyster shell into the water, you'll know. It's not just a nostalgic act or a quirky tradition. It's a small but powerful gesture in the fight to bring a damaged ecosystem back to life, one shell at a time. China's agricultural land is shrinking, and fast. That may come as a surprise for a country that's been turning deserts green, tree by tree, acre by acre. But while environmental restoration is a long game, degradation moves quickly. Between industrial development, booming cities, and widespread pollution, China is losing valuable farmland every year. By the end of 2019, China's total arable land measured just under 494,000 square miles. That's a big number on paper, but it's a 6% drop from just a decade earlier, in 2009. The causes are clear: relentless urban expansion, growing industrial demands, inefficient farming practices, and serious environmental degradation. But China's response to this agricultural crisis includes a rather unexpected ally: the crayfish. Yes, crayfish, those small freshwater crustaceans with snapping claws. It sounds strange, even absurd, but these little creatures are playing an outsized role in not just revitalizing farmland, but also in fighting poverty and transforming rural economies. Their journey from exotic novelty to agricultural powerhouse is one of the most fascinating stories in modern farming. The species making waves in China is Procambarus clarkii, commonly known as the red swamp crayfish. It's native to the southern United States, not East Asia. In fact, for most of China's history, crayfish weren't even part of the local ecosystem or cuisine. So how did they get there? The introduction of crayfish dates back to the Second Sino-Japanese War between 1937 and 1945. At the time, crayfish were kept as pets by some Japanese, and many were brought along during the occupation of parts of China. From there, they slowly made their way into China's rivers, lakes, and rice paddies, spreading quietly, unnoticed by most. For decades, they remained relatively obscure, but by the early 1990s, the story started to change. A culinary trend began to take hold. Crayfish dishes, often spicy, stewed, or soaked in wine, gained popularity in restaurants and street stalls across China. The public couldn't get enough. It was a culinary explosion that no one saw coming. Today, China consumes over 90% of the world's crayfish supply. That's more than 1 million tons of crayfish devoured each year. With such massive demand, it was only a matter of time before farming operations ramped up. From small family-run ponds to massive industrial-scale farms, crayfish cultivation has become a national phenomenon. According to China's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, crayfish farming was already significant back in 2007, with an annual output of 265,000 tons. Less than a decade later, in 2016, that number had more than tripled to 850,000 tons. Wild-caught crayfish added another 49,000 tons to the total. But the real boom was yet to come. By 2022, China's crayfish production reached a staggering 2.5 million tons. The entire industry was valued at over 369 billion yuan, or about 53 billion US dollars. That's more than the GDP of some small countries. Crayfish were no longer just a culinary trend. They had become a cornerstone of the rural economy. One standout example is Shui County, located in eastern China's Jiangsu province. Known as the crayfish capital of China, Shui has transformed its economy around these crustaceans. By 2025, the county had established 165,000 acres of eco-friendly crayfish farming zones. Over 210,000 residents, more than the population of Salt Lake City, work in crayfish-related industries. Even the crayfish themselves have evolved. Through selective breeding, local farmers developed a line of crayfish that grow larger and reach maturity faster than the original imports. This faster-growing strain can earn farmers an additional 500 yuan per mu, a Chinese land measurement equal to about 1/6 of an acre. It's a significant economic boost in rural areas, where incomes are often limited. In Hubei province, another crayfish stronghold, the city of Xinjiang proudly boasts a 49-foot-tall crayfish statue, the tallest in the world, officially listed in the Guinness Book of Records. The city has become a tourist destination, often called the Eco-City of Crayfish, with restaurants, educational tours, and scenic farming zones all built around the industry. At one processing plant alone in Xinjiang, 500 workers handle 80 tons of crayfish in just a 10-hour shift. Multiply that by the hundreds of facilities scattered across China, and it becomes clear. This is not just a food item, it's a national enterprise. But perhaps the most fascinating development of all is how crayfish are being integrated directly into agriculture, specifically into rice farming. This method is known as integrated crayfish rice farming, and it's proving to be one of China's most promising sustainable farming innovations. The idea is simple yet ingenious. Farmers plant rice in their paddies as usual, but they also dig circular trenches around the fields. These serve as habitats for crayfish. After the rice is harvested, the leftover straw is left in the field, and the paddies are flooded, creating an ideal nursery for young crayfish. The straw provides warmth and shelter during cooler months and eventually decomposes, becoming food for the crayfish. As omnivorous scavengers, crayfish feed on detritus, decomposing plant material, and small aquatic organisms. Their constant foraging keeps the paddies clean and reduces pests. Meanwhile, crayfish waste acts as a natural fertilizer, releasing organic carbon, nitrogen, and potassium, essential nutrients for rice growth. And there's more. When crayfish die, their bodies decompose and further enrich the soil. This cycle significantly reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides, resulting in cleaner, healthier rice and less environmental pollution. A study published in the Chinese Journal of Ecological Agriculture monitored integrated crayfish rice systems from 2005 to 2015. The results showed that these systems significantly outperformed traditional monoculture rice fields in terms of soil health, biodiversity, and yield. Before 2014, farmers would rotate between crayfish and rice on the same fields, but the introduction of mixed farming changed everything. By 2015, 93% of local farms in participating regions had adopted this integrated approach. According to a 2018 report by the Ministry of Agriculture, crayfish production in one city doubled in a single year, reaching 70,000 tons in 2017. This method is now widely seen as a way to maximize yields, increase rural incomes, and make use of less fertile soil, all without compromising environmental sustainability. As revolutionary as this farming method is, it's not without its downsides. First, growing rice and crayfish together isn't as easy as it might seem. It requires technical knowledge, careful planning, and precise water management. Crayfish are resilient, but they're also opportunistic feeders. If managed poorly, they can start damaging the rice crop they're meant to support. Then there's the issue of land use. To create permanent crayfish habitats, many farmers dig deep trenches and flood fields year-round. This shift from seasonal to permanent flooding reduces the availability of dry land, especially for winter crops like wheat, barley, and rye. That's a serious concern. While rice remains China's primary grain, with 207.5 million tons produced in 2024, wheat is close behind at 140.1 million tons. Wheat is essential for bread, noodles, dumplings, and other staples. Reducing wheat output could strain China's food security, especially as demand continues to rise. One striking example comes from the Yangtze River Basin, where over 1.6 million acres of rice and crayfish fields used to support winter wheat cultivation. Now, much of that land stays underwater year-round, making it unsuitable for wheat farming. And that's just one region. This growing tension between aquaculture and dry farming raises important questions. Can China strike a balance between maximizing income from crayfish and protecting long-term grain supplies? Can integrated systems evolve to support both summer and winter crops? Despite the challenges, China's crayfish experiment has captured the attention of the world. It's a rare example of an invasive species being transformed into a tool for sustainable farming, poverty alleviation, and even national pride. From obscure foreign invader to economic driver, crayfish have changed the face of rural China. They've turned remote counties into thriving communities, reduced reliance on chemical fertilizers, and offered a viable path for regenerating degraded land. Throughout history, deserts have both challenged and inspired human progress. Along ancient trade routes, such as the Silk Road, caravans braved shifting sands to exchange goods, ideas, and culture. Even so, deserts remained a persistent threat, capable of swallowing entire cities and forcing populations to relocate in search of fertile land. In modern-day China, deserts still pose significant challenges, yet they have also become the focus of one of the most ambitious environmental transformations in recent history. Over the past few decades, China has undertaken large-scale projects to halt and even reverse the spread of its deserts. The Gobi and Taklamakan, once considered impenetrable and uncontrollable, have begun to shrink in certain areas due to reforestation programs and innovative water management. At the same time, China's rapid industrialization has placed unprecedented demands on resources like sand and water, sparking further concerns for sustainability. China's deserts comprise a significant portion of its northern and western territories. Historically, nomadic communities coexisted with these arid lands, adapting their lives to seasonal weather patterns. However, as the 20th century brought industrial expansion, pressures on the environment grew. By the 1970s, the Gobi Desert alone was encroaching southward at an alarming pace, threatening settlements and farmland. The Taklamakan Desert, famously nicknamed the Sea of Death, also expanded its dunes into once fertile margins. The Chinese government recognized the urgency of the problem in the late 1970s. By 1978, leaders unveiled a reforestation initiative known as the 3 North Shelter Forest Program, also called the Gray-Green Wall. Influenced by smaller-scale afforestation projects worldwide, policymakers envisioned a vast belt of trees stretching across multiple provinces. The ultimate goal was straightforward: stabilize the shifting sands and protect towns and cities from devastating sandstorms. At the time, many experts questioned whether such a massive tree-planting venture could succeed in regions known for harsh climates and minimal rainfall. Yet the commitment was unwavering. Public and private entities joined forces, marshaling thousands of volunteers and professionals to begin planting tree saplings. Early phases faced difficulties due to low survival rates, harsh winters, and limited irrigation infrastructure. Nevertheless, each obstacle provided lessons, and by the 1990s, tree survival rates had begun to improve. From 1978 until the mid-2000s, the 3 North Shelter Forest Program expanded steadily. According to government reports, around 193,000 square miles of land had been afforested by 2009. The program set a long-term horizon, with a target completion date of 2050, indicating the nation's emphasis on persistence and sustained effort. Data released in 2022 suggests a remarkable milestone. The Gobi Desert, once growing by an estimated 3,800 square miles annually in the 1980s, has begun to contract. Researchers calculate it is now shrinking by about 770 square miles per year, a shift often attributed to tree planting, irrigation management, and better land use regulations. Concurrently, the frequency of sandstorms has shown a measurable decrease, offering relief to regions within China as well as neighboring countries like Mongolia, North Korea, and South Korea. Local communities played a crucial role in these successes. Countless individual citizens, motivated by the prospect of safeguarding their homes, took part in planting and maintaining saplings. In one well-publicized example, a couple in Inner Mongolia reportedly spent 4 decades planting 74,000 acres of trees. Their dedication symbolizes a grassroots approach where ordinary people contribute to a monumental national objective. While the Gobi captures much of the media attention, the Taklamakan Desert is equally significant, covering roughly 130,000 square miles. It is China's largest shifting sand desert. Desertification here was so extreme that farmers regularly witnessed dunes advancing onto cultivated plots and roads. In response, authorities launched the Green Belt Project, an extension of the Great Green Wall principle, designed to surround the Taklamakan with a vegetative buffer. This undertaking resulted in a 1,890-mile-long belt circling the desert. Planners introduced hardy plant species such as desert poplars, red willows, and drought-resistant shrubs capable of anchoring the soil. Implementation stretched across 4 decades, concluding major phases in 2022. By that point, approximately 1,715 miles of the belt had been established, with an additional 177 miles left to finish. Local economies benefited as some species planted in the green belt carried agricultural or medicinal value, creating new revenue streams. However, maintaining these desert forests remains challenging, with irrigation systems and continuous monitoring essential to ensuring survival rates. China's leadership also prioritized building infrastructure in previously unreachable desert regions. This serves multiple functions, supporting natural resource extraction, improving transport efficiency, and connecting isolated communities. In the Taklamakan, engineers have constructed 3 major highways across the shifting sands. The oldest, completed in 1995, was primarily intended for oilfield development but quickly opened to the public. 2 additional highways followed in the ensuing years to meet growing travel and logistics needs. Each road presented formidable hurdles, especially regarding constant sand accumulation on the pavement. To combat encroaching dunes, China established a network of small irrigation stations at 2.5-mile intervals along the roads. These stations pump water to desert plants capable of stabilizing the sand. Additionally, workers use specialized nets and fences that slow shifting dunes. According to local highway authorities, annual maintenance can involve removing millions of tons of sand to keep lanes clear. Over time, these measures have dramatically improved road safety and usability. Similar challenges arose with the Lingtuan Railway, a 439-mile track running predominantly through remote desert land. High winds and sand buildup initially caused regular disruptions. To mitigate these issues, rail officials introduced sand barriers, planted vegetation around the tracks, and set up 9 sand control centers for continuous monitoring. Within a year, an estimated 10,000 workers were mobilized and $500,000 spent on track maintenance and vegetation projects. These proactive strategies highlight China's determination to sustain functional transport networks in harsh environments. Alongside reforestation and infrastructure, China has invested in large-scale renewable energy projects in its deserts. Perhaps the most visually striking example is the solar thermal power station near Dunhuang in the Gobi Desert. Its 12,000 mirrors track the sun and reflect concentrated light onto a central tower filled with molten salt. The salt's heat generates steam that drives turbines, producing up to 100,000 kilowatts per hour, enough, by certain estimates, to power 1,100,000-watt light bulbs simultaneously. Solar thermal stations offer an advantage over standard photovoltaic arrays. The molten salt retains heat for hours after sunset, creating a more stable and continuous power supply. Official data suggests this Dunhuang plant can deliver about 390 million kilowatt-hours of electricity annually, displacing fossil fuels and reducing carbon emissions. Looking ahead, the success or failure of these initiatives carries implications beyond China's borders. Nations in Africa and the Middle East, facing similar desertification, often look to China's mixed experiences for inspiration and cautionary tales. As desertification threatens roughly 13 million square miles worldwide, efforts to curb its advance could shape future dialogues on climate adaptation, food security, and biodiversity. China's response to desertification is still unfolding. The 3 North Shelter Forest Program, scheduled to run until 2050, shows that the country views its deserts as long-term, strategic concerns rather than short-term obstacles. Ongoing research into drought-resistant species, water-saving irrigation, and renewable energy may pave the way for new breakthroughs. A country once plagued by expanding deserts has proven that human determination can shape landscapes, often for the better. Yet these strides remain delicate, reliant on careful stewardship of resources and balanced economic strategies. Whether these efforts ultimately yield enduring ecological health or create further unintended consequences will hinge on the continuous refinement of technology, policy, and public engagement. China's history of monumental construction stretches back over 2,000 years, with projects like the Great Wall and the Grand Canal standing as symbols of human tenacity and vision. These early feats, achieved through vast mobilization of manpower and rudimentary tools, shaped trade, territory, and culture across centuries. Today, China's drive to build remains undiminished, yet it has evolved into a highly mechanized, technology-intensive endeavor, from coastal reclamation to high-speed railways spanning thousands of kilometers. The country's approach to infrastructure development has undergone a sweeping transformation. This modern momentum is powered by an arsenal of unprecedented mega-machines, each capable of completing projects at speeds and scales that were once unimaginable. In the late 20th century, a series of economic reforms paved the way for rapid industrial growth and an urgent demand for new infrastructure. Between 1980 and 2000, China's urban population nearly doubled, placing immense pressure on traditional building methods. In response, state-owned enterprises and private firms began investing in advanced construction equipment. By the mid-2000s, the country emerged as a leader in large-scale engineering projects, exemplified by landmarks such as the Three Gorges Dam, an undertaking that required sophisticated cranes, tunneling devices, and specialized vessels. These earlier achievements served as a catalyst, prompting further innovations in machinery that would eventually redefine global standards for construction speed and capacity. The Magic Island maker, Tianquan. A key milestone in coastal engineering emerged in 2017, when China unveiled the massive dredging vessel Tianquan. Measuring 140 meters in length and nearly 28 meters in width, it stands among the most powerful dredgers in Asia, with the capacity to excavate and pump up to 6,000 cubic meters of seabed materials per hour. It can fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool in just 20 minutes. This continuous process of suction and deposition has been instrumental in reclaiming land for industrial zones and port expansions, as well as in island-building initiatives. While the technique raises concerns about coastal ecosystems, the vessel's efficiency has accelerated projects that once required years of painstaking labor. The SLJ 932 Iron Monster, revolutionizing bridge construction. Moving from seascapes to spans of concrete and steel, the SLJ 900/32 has become emblematic of China's rapid bridge-building capability. Launched in the 2010s, this 91-meter-long machine, often referred to as the Iron Monster, moves on 64 wheels subdivided into 4 sections, each capable of rotating 90 degrees. By aligning itself with pre-existing bridge columns, it lifts and places prefabricated segments with remarkable precision. This approach reduces the need for extensive scaffolding, lowers labor costs, and improves safety conditions. Early estimates suggest the SLJ 932 can place a new span every 24 minutes, potentially completing over 700 bridge segments throughout its service life. As part of the Belt and Road Initiative, these machines facilitate the construction of expansive overpasses that link remote regions, transforming local economies in the process. The 1,000-ton level girder erection machine. For cross-sea high-speed railway projects, China has deployed a 1,000-ton level girder erection machine designed to operate in harsh coastal and oceanic conditions. Often measuring over 160 meters in length, this specialized equipment integrates more than 15,000 individual components. Its standout feature lies in its endurance, as it can withstand high-velocity winds and corrosive saltwater environments. This capability enables construction to progress with minimal downtime, even during challenging weather. By speeding up segment placement and eliminating certain manual steps, the machine exemplifies how China's construction sector merges size with cutting-edge technology. Many infrastructure planners point to these innovations as contributors to the consistent expansion of the country's high-speed rail network, already the largest of its kind in the world. Fast-tracking railway development, the CYP 500. High-speed rail forms a critical component of China's blueprint for economic growth, linking distant cities and fostering trade. At the heart of this vision are machines like the CYP500, a rapid track-laying system capable of laying 2 kilometers of railway track in a single day. Older methods might achieve a few hundred meters in the same time frame, making this device a major breakthrough for on-site efficiency. Each unit is equipped with synchronized cranes that hoist rails and concrete sleepers, positioning them with precision before sealing them into place. These systematic steps reduce manual labor, enhance safety, and keep projects on schedule. By enabling quick completion of tracks through mountainous and urban regions alike, the CYP500 has allowed China's railway network to reach over 40,000 kilometers of high-speed lines as of the early 2020s. Going underground, CRCHI tunneling machines. China's focus on connectivity also extends below the surface. Tunneling machines produced by the China Railway Construction Heavy Industry Corporation, CRCHI, often reach diameters of up to 15 meters, making them among the largest tunnel borers worldwide. They combine impressive torque, sometimes exceeding 40,000 Newton meters, with advanced laser guidance. This setup enables simultaneous excavation and lining of tunnel walls, minimizing potential collapse and erosion. In urban centers such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, these machines have delivered new subway lines ahead of tight deadlines, alleviating congestion for millions of commuters. In mountainous provinces, similarly configured tunnel borers drill through challenging rock formations to pave the way for expressways and high-speed rails. These feats underscore the integral role of mechanized tunneling in China's broader infrastructure strategy. Heavy lifting, XCMG 4,000-ton crawler crane. For projects requiring massive lifts, like placing large prefabricated components in power plants or erecting wind turbines, China has turned to crawler cranes with previously unthinkable capacities. The XCMG 4,000-ton crawler crane exemplifies this, capable of lifting loads equivalent to 4,000 average sedans at once. Standing at over 100 meters in height when configured for maximum lift, it leverages a robust lattice boom and complex counterweight system. Its ability to place massive sections with millimeter precision has redefined how engineers approach plant construction and industrial assembly. By making it feasible to pre-build large modules off-site, the crane reduces assembly times and improves quality control, benefiting projects that emphasize safety, like nuclear facilities. Zoomlion ZC32000, another giant in the crane world. Another record-setting crawler crane is the Zoomlion ZC32000, with a 3,200-ton lifting capacity and a maximum height of around 178 meters. It competes on a global scale for heavy lifting applications. Equipped with modular design features, this crane can be swiftly assembled on-site, which is an important advantage for large-scale energy developments, such as wind farm installations and petrochemical expansions. Operators can maneuver multi-ton components with millimeter-level accuracy, a critical factor for delicate equipment like reactor vessels. This precision also reduces the risk of workplace accidents. Since its debut, the ZCC32000 has become a mainstay for large contractors, illustrating the growing demand for high-capacity lifts in China's evolving industrial landscape. In pushing the limits of engineering, China's construction boom offers a glimpse into a future in which large-scale building may be measured not only by speed, but by the broader impacts it leaves on communities and the planet.